Today we're going to mix things up. I have with me Lacey Peace, host of Experts of Experience here on mission.org, and we're going to turn the tables and have her interview me.
Your background is so interesting, man. I feel like security just runs in your blood, so I'm glad that we get to go into this today. We're going to cover 3 threats that IT leaders need to prepare for.
These ransomware-as-a-service companies actually have tech support. They have customer satisfaction surveys. It's big business.
I had no idea that there were secret businesses like that.
And a third of those attacks are really coming through supply chain.
Is there prevention mechanisms that we should be talking about or looking at?
You have to be right 100% of the time.
We've been seeing a huge increase in IT worker attacks. What is that? And why is that super alarming for businesses?
So North Korean nationals are applying for jobs at companies in the United States.
The whole time that interviewer does not know that this is a North Korean worker.
Who knows, who's working in some companies. They could just appear as a regular worker. All this is really important because all these attacks are from the inside, whether it's actual hired employees or even disgruntled employees is a big attack vector too. 70% of cyber incidents are related to some sort of human error or some kind of miscalculation or carelessness.
AI is a weapon and a shield. So would this be your number one tip to IT leaders on how to improve their resilience to cyber extortion?
Here's where I would start. Welcome back to IT Visionaries. I'm your host, Chris Brandt. We're going to talk about some really important security issues that are top of mind for folks in tech. So let's get at it. Welcome, Lacey.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Before we jump into the 3 threats we're going to talk about today, I wanted to tee you up a little bit because I don't know if all of our listeners know what your day job is. Do you mind sharing what you do at Pure Storage?
My day job, I work for a major storage vendor. My focus is on cybersecurity and resilience for that company. And so I spend a lot of time having security conversations for sure.
But your background's also very interesting. You worked in EMP-shielded data centers for a bit. So give us a little bit more on your background here in security.
That one, I was CTO of a mission critical build facility and data center operator for kind of a high security data center facilities where we kind of built SCIF secure compartmentalized information facility. I think one of the coolest projects I worked on was building out an EMP-shielded data center 225 feet underneath a mountain that had its own whole cold zip code fire department and lake in it. It was actually the facility was a former bug out spot for Washington, D.C. So it's a very high security facility and it just has some really fascinating properties. And working on defending against EMP is a really interesting piece too, because, for those who are unfamiliar with it, EMP is electromagnetic pulse. And when we talk about one of the big threats is the idea of a nuclear device being detonated up in the ionosphere and causing a huge electrical pulse that maybe another podcast episode we could talk about, but huge magnetic pulse that'll just blow out all electronics. And so you have to do some very special things to preserve electronics in the face of something like that.
Yeah. Your background is so interesting, man. I feel like security just runs in your blood. So I'm glad that we get to go into this today.
Well, it's funny because I did get out of security a little bit for a while because, after some of these projects and talking to the people, I work with people, from, who work on NSA facilities and things like defense and things like that. And they make you so paranoid, you can't just look at things every day and just go, oh yeah, well, no big deal. It's you're like, oh my God, that's not good.
Yeah. There is that quote. I think it was Andy Grove. Only the paranoid survive. So unfortunately, that's just what it takes. I know all sorts of weird things that you need to survive when everything goes down, and that I wish I didn't know. Oh man. Okay. Well, getting into today's episode, we're going to cover 3 threats that IT leaders need to prepare for today as of September 2025. The first one is cyber extortion.
I'm glad that you said cyber extortion, because that's a really interesting aspect of it. Because, we've been calling this ransomware for a long time, but it's actually, there's a big shift now that's happening from just locking down systems to actually exfiltrating this data and then using that data to get paid from leaking confidential and sensitive information, putting companies at risk of regulatory and compliance violations, all that sort of thing. So, I mean, let me back up a little bit here too, and kind of paint the picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
Ransomware or cyber extortion is sort of a fundamentally different piece from what we see in other areas like advanced persistent threats and things, which tend to be more like nation state type actors that are coming in. Whereas the cyber extortion side of things is a well-honed business. There's literally attacks as a service companies out there. You can buy the initial exploits. You can buy elevated permissions into these things. You can buy backdoors. They have all the tools you need. So you don't really need to even know how to operate these tools. And a lot of times when we see the interactions with these people, they don't even know how to, because things break and they go, I don't know. But that's okay too, because these ransomware-as-a-service companies actually have tech support. They have customer satisfaction surveys. It's big business. So
I had no idea. That there was these secret businesses like that. Yeah.
It's totally crazy. And the thing that's interesting about that is like those folks tend to be in it to get the money. They want to get in, they want to get the stuff and get out pretty quickly. And we've seen that play out over the years as shorter and shorter dwell times. And what I mean by dwell times is when they initially attack, they'll come in and within moments, they'll start exfiltrating data, right? So that's happening in the background. But they're not going to go in and encrypt all your files and lock you down right away. They're going to sit in your environment, spread their access across the organization, and then at one point trigger it all. So it's an overwhelming problem for any company to solve, right? So what we're seeing is like the average dwell time used to be, in the month range, kind of things like that, but it's been slowly shortening. And I think, it depends on who you ask and, all the different studies and surveys and things out there. But generally it seems to fall between like 10 and 14 days of dwell time, because they do want to, the longer they spend in there, the more likely they are to get caught. So, they're going to encrypt all the files. And it's not just like, oh, we're going to encrypt this one database. They're going to encrypt everything. They're going to take everything down. So they come in, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to, if they don't already have elevated privileges. So the one thing you have to consider about these types of attacks is that they are essentially insider attacks. And so up until recently, the major attack vector that was coming in was really around compromised credentials. So somebody, gives you a phishing call and they, all that, and they get that stuff. But now it's actually shifted to unpatched software vulnerabilities as sort of the number one attack vector. And a third of those attacks are really coming through supply chain. So there was recently a couple of attacks that where they went in and attacked a GitHub repository that was a dependency on other things in various software packages. And I think the first one, they put the back doors in there, and it was like 56,000 companies downloaded it instantly. There was another one that had, was doing like 71 million downloads, and they inserted, backdoors into that. So the probability that you're going to catch that is very, very low. And even these things, they don't sit in places where you can see them. They'll sit resident in memory. They change their code signatures. They'll recompile themselves to avoid detection. So they're really hard to find, right? So now you're looking at, instead of just trying to restore a portion of your environment, you're really literally trying to restore your entire environment, which is a huge, huge task. That's how they get you. And then they try to extort you for, money and get out. The challenge here is that if you look at all of the big attacks that we've seen, like the Colonial Pipelines of the world, the Change, healthcares and things like that, where they had like fairly extended outages, every one of them had some sort of data protection product in there. And quite literally, that's what saved them too.
Talk to me a little bit more about this Colonial Pipeline and Change Healthcare examples. Could you, for anyone that maybe hasn't heard about these or doesn't know, can't recall the exact details, is that something that you could give us a quick
Sure.
on?
I mean, like Colonial Pipeline was, they ran an oil pipeline, and it shut down large portions of the business, and they had to shut the pipeline down. So it impacted our access to fuel at the refineries. So there was we saw rising gas prices, and just it created a lot of market chaos.
Wow.
And they were down for a fairly extended period of time.
We're talking like days or weeks with that.
Yes, weeks in the weeks time frame. Yeah, I mean,
wow.
certainly, different parts came up in different orders, right?
For
so
sure.
It's an ongoing process. And I've with the Change Healthcare, I don't know if you remember that, but doctors were went back to pen and paper to take notes, and it locked up healthcare and ability to do procedures. They had to reschedule surgeries. It was a lot
insane.
It created a lot of chaos, wow. Right? And it went on for an extended period of time. And I've seen personally organizations, very large organizations, that got hit, and full recovery took more than a year in some of these things, and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, so the impact of these things is significant for some organizations. And when you look at reputational damage and things like that. And one of the things you have to realize too is a lot of these companies have reporting requirements too. So it's not just like they were, their business shut down and then they got it back up. Now they got to go back and figure out like what got leaked, what was accessed, and they have to report on all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that is a significant forensic effort. So that said, the impact, the blast area of these kinds of things is really, really wide.
So what do you do as a business? Like what if this is, because you're basically sharing that it's really hard to detect these. So it's really hard to detect them. Is there prevention mechanisms that we should be talking about or looking at?
So there's an enormous amount of security software sprawl in most organizations. I mean, there's thousands of products out there, right? That focus on detection and that. And it goes back to the old saying, like you have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once, right?
Yep.
And that's absolutely true. And when you look at the way these supply chain attacks work, if these things are coming from upstream vendors and things like that, you don't really have visibility into that. So personally, my belief is that, you should take a look at your budget and how much you're spending on security software for detection and shift some of that into more the remediation and recovery side of the business, because that's the thing that's ultimately gonna save you. Because it's not a matter of if, it's when, and it's not like when is once. If you get hit, you're going to get hit again. And if you pay, you're definitely going to get hit again, right? So they're going to come back for you, so these are all important things. The guidance used to be that if your environment got hacked, you couldn't trust anything in your environment. You kind of had to replace your hardware and all your environment and forensically migrate things onto the new hardware. And, that took an enormous amount of time. That was extremely expensive. And now the guidance from like the 3-letter agencies is really kind of different. It's about, a lot of these attacks at the end of the day are like denial of service attacks. And it's about reestablishing minimum viable business as soon as possible.
Yeah. Not weeks later, like we just were talking about with some of these others. Yep.
This episode of IT Visionaries is brought to you by Meter, the company building better networks. Businesses today are frustrated with outdated providers, rigid pricing, and fragmented tools. Meter changes that with a single integrated solution that covers everything: wired, wireless, and even cellular networking. They design the hardware, write the firmware, build the software, and manage it all so your team doesn't have to. That means you get fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of juggling multiple providers. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to meter.com/ITV to book a demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. Yeah, absolutely. And so the only way that you can really achieve that is to have a snapshot available. So like when you think about what snapshots are, is like they're kind of point in time copies of your environment, your storage environment. And so, they generally don't take up additional space because, they're only whatever your change data is what kind of consumes the space. But the recommendation is to have immutable versions of those. So those are versions that cannot be deleted by anybody inside, because remember, all of these attacks are coming from the inside, right? So they're all privileged user attacks. So they're no different than anybody who works there every day, going in and trying to delete these files. So I recently was working with a healthcare organization that they had an extortion and cyber extortion event. They came in, they deleted all of their snapshots that were not immutable. They deleted all of their backups. They deleted all of their logs. They completely changed all of their identity access management systems. And they were able to recover really rapidly because they did have immutable snapshots, and they recovered back to production and they got back up and running. So the idea is now that you want to get your business back to a minimum viable state, so that you can get your business back up and running. And the only way to really do that is to do it, via snapshot, because moving data takes time. So what I've seen the market shifting to a bit is more around, data lifecycle management kind of tools, where they're orchestrating snapshots on the various storage platforms and handling the backup and the indexing. And most of them are also integrating security tools into these backup products.
Is there a recommendation on how frequently to capture these snapshots?
That depends a little bit on your environment, but what I typically see is, most companies are retaining 7 to 14 days of immutable snapshots on production environments, and then retaining longer term copies offline, because there may be, compromises that go back in time even further than that 10 to 14 day window or whatever. So you do want to have access to more, to reconstruct your environment. Because so basically what you're doing is you're taking that last snapshot and you're looking at it, you're bringing your incident response teams, your forensics teams in, and you're looking for indicators of compromise, right? You're cleaning those indicators of compromise. You may not have a fully cleaned out environment. You do the best you can, and you recover that to production, and you continue to clean that environment and restore all the missing pieces back up to that environment.
From a timeline perspective, you mentioned that when we talked about these examples of people taking, or companies taking days, weeks to recover, if not maybe like for a smaller business, never recovering because they couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely businesses that go out of business. I mean, this can be
from this type of stuff all the time. Yeah. So what's the contrast timeline wise? Is it like now I'm taking a couple hours to get back online, or am I taking a couple days to get back online? I'm sure it's dependent business to business.
Yeah, what I would say is like it depends on the complexity of your environment. And it depends on sort of the scale of what you're restoring and what you consider minimum viable business. But with a snapshot, you can literally recover you could do it in minutes, but you will never get into that scenario because you still have to bring them up and go through it, look for indicators of compromise, and you kind of have to rebuild databases and there's a lot of other things around the edges that you have to do, but it does take it from, certainly from weeks potentially down to a day or days.
And how common is this new type of environment that you're talking about? Is this like most businesses are doing it the way that you're suggesting, or most businesses are still doing it the old way and need to start moving to this new way?
I think what I'm seeing is it's scattered all over the place, right? I mean, it's a lot of different, everybody's in sort of a different phase of the journey. And if you look at when we look at resilience and availability of businesses and systems, we started off originally with like, we're going to get high availability. And everybody's like, oh my God, I got to buy a second server to have high availability, and then we went on and now we're going to back up our environments. So if those things go down or there's a logical error, we can restore it. And everybody's like, oh my God, my backup environment costs more than my production environment. Recovering from a cyber event is very different than just like some sort of disaster that you would normally encounter. So you have to treat it differently, and it requires a different set of controls, different strategies and things like that. So creating an isolated recovery environment where you're really restricting the flow of the access to this environment, really locking it off from your production environment, and preserving your assets in there and having the systems ready to go and roll back into production right away is, the fastest way to get your stuff back. So
would this be your number one tip to IT leaders on how to improve their resilience to cyber extortion?
Here's where I would start with them. First of all, if you have access to some sort of immutability for snapshots in your environment, turn that on, make use of that right away. The second thing I would say is like, it's really important to go through the exercise of doing what it looks like to bring up a minimum viable business. And the place where I see so many organizations faltering here is they're not engaging all the people within the organization, because it requires all the stakeholders. There's a financial component to this. There's an operations component to this. A security component to this. There's a line of business component to it. There's regulatory and compliance and risk component to it. And all of those parties need to be on board in building this and defining what that minimum viable business looks like. And I would say that's the place to start. It just is getting everybody on the same page to have that conversation. Because I see so many times it's like, well, we need this isolated recovery environment, some executive mandate on that. And we're just going to toss it to the infrastructure group to figure out. And they can't do that because they don't know where the risks lie. They don't know where the priorities are. So it's really important to involve the whole organization in that effort. So that's my main tip.
I love that. It's a great way to, I think, close out this first threat and move on to threat number 2 that we've talked about. We've been seeing a huge increase in IT worker attacks. What is that? And why is that super alarming for businesses?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. And I was recently at a hacking conference in Chicago, and I didn't really realize how widespread this problem had become. Until I started talking to a lot of security professionals about what they were seeing in their own organizations. So what we're seeing, and the folks I've been talking to, largely this is a phenomenon around North Korean attacks. So North Korean nationals are applying for jobs at companies in the United States. They're going through the whole interview process. They're getting hired. And they're getting onboarded. They're getting access credentials, email addresses. They're getting laptops sent out to them. And then in some cases, these laptops are going to people who are brokering connections for these nation state actors. And so they'll set up a laptop, turn it on, plug it into the internet, and they'll just bounce through that to get into these corporate networks.
So like the whole time, that interviewer does not know that this is a North Korean worker, right? Like
correct.
Or they know that they're hiring someone from North Korea.
They think they're just hiring a tech worker. I need...
Yeah, just some person. Yep.
For example, it's hard to get AI talent. I'm looking for programmers for AI or developers who know AI. They're desperately trying to find the right individuals. And so these people are getting hired. And and they're getting complete access to everything, and they'll come in, and then when I say, this is why I say, like, the immutability piece of all this is really important, because all these attacks are from the inside, whether it's elevated permissions, whether it's like actual hired employees, or even disgruntled employees is a big attack vector too. But these IT worker attacks we've seen a big uptick in, and it's really fascinating. There's a company that does a lot of work around phishing attacks and preparing organizations for phishing attack. KnowBe4. They actually did a blog post about this, about how they actually hired a North Korean national into their company, but they were
accidentally?
Unintentionally. They didn't realize that was what happening, but they quickly caught it, and it's more of a success story about how they dealt with such a thing. But I mean, like, it goes to show you that when we talk about supply chain attacks, like, they're even getting hired into, who knows, who's working in some companies. They could just appear as a regular worker, and in some cases that actually is something they're doing to raise money for their organization and effort, is they're actually getting employed by United States companies, even though they're all under sanctions and things like that. So, there's a lot of stuff like that going on too.
So, and that's a prime example though, is there basically, you mentioned something to me about it being a text message. Like, as I've got these text messages before where it's like, hey, for $250 a day, all you have to do is just have a laptop. And this is all correlated, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely another aspect, that they're going out and they're finding, more vulnerable people who will $500 a day, that'd be great. All I have to do is turn this laptop on and, surf a couple things a day, and they'll pay me $500 a day. It's like, yeah, sure.
And so then they're connecting into that computer, and then they're using that to work
to jump
from.
Yeah.
Wow. So how do you even, I mean, I don't know, maybe you learned something from this blog post that you read, or maybe while you're talking to people at the tech conference you were at, but what do I do? How do I make sure I'm not accidentally hiring a worker from North Korea?
Well, and it's hard. It's hard. I mean, you have to really vet your employees. You have to do the background checks. You can't just use an automated process for doing it. I mean, you really have to take the time and care in what you're doing. And it's hard because, the economy has been tough. And I think we've seen a lot of like HR departments, slashed to the bone. And how many organizations have you heard talking about like, well, we're just going to replace all these people with AI, and that's one big market where they're really applying a lot of AI is in the hiring process. It's a tricky situation. And this is why it's not always about detection. A lot of the detection work happens after the attack to figure out what happened and where it came from. It is about just making sure you have the ability to recover because they're going to get in one way or another.
Yeah, whether it's, through some malware or something coming in, or it's apparently a North Korean worker.
Yeah, I mean, I saw one of I think it was Meta or something. There was something about like 70% of cyber incidents are related to, some sort of human error or, some kind of miscalculation or carelessness,
Yep.
I mean, if you have people in your organization, there's going to be a problem.
We talked to Taylor Hersom, who's the CEO and founder of Eden Data, and I hope that you get to have him on IT Visionaries at some point.
That'd be great.
But he came on and talked about sort of the experience side of why having tight cybersecurity is important from a customer experience perspective. But he also mentioned that same stat of how most of these events, like I was asking him, like, I bet there's these high-tech AI, whatever, that's breaking into these companies. And it's really just basic, like, human error. 90% of the time, it's someone clicked a link they shouldn't have clicked. They accepted an invite or something that they shouldn't have, or they didn't change their password as frequently as they should have. It's just very basic things that we've been hearing for decades about how to be secure that's causing these gaps.
Or the fact that we're using passwords at all. I mean, passwords, we've been promised that we're going to get rid of passwords for a long time, and it still hasn't happened. In some places, I don't see it anymore. I mean, social engineering is the big risk. When you talk to people who do a lot of, white, black, or gray hat sort of hacking, social engineering is like their big vector, right? And so you have to take that stuff, very seriously. You have to train your people. It's hard. It's very, very hard. Yeah. I mean, I know what to look for in, weird emails. But, it's hard, really hard for me to avoid phishing attacks, especially now, we're seeing more like spear phishing type of attacks. And I think you're probably going to, the next question you're going to ask me is about what I'm about to talk about. So I'll let you ask that question.
I didn't even realize we were naturally going into AI, which is the third thing I wanted to talk about with you, is how we had a woman come on from Palo Alto Networks, and she said AI is a weapon and a shield, and that stuck with me. And we've talked a lot across our different podcasts on how AI is a shield, but I now want to talk with you about why it's a weapon. And so this is just a perfect segue into what you were just speaking about.
Yeah, well, oh boy, it's been weaponized on so many fronts. This is a bit of a long story. One, we were just talking about social engineering. AI has changed the game of social engineering entirely, because if you remember, we used to get those like, "Hi, I are your rep from Chase Bank. Please do."
Like and it's terrible got logo,
terrible like faxed logos,
and then the email it's sent from is like xy.hello.princess.at@gmail.com.
Yeah, and you're like 32678. Like a whole. I mean, and that used to be the thing, and now you're seeing people who are not native English speakers able to produce absolutely identical emails and things like that are really hard to discern. And you can do things with like URLs where you can embed characters that are very similar, like Cyrillian characters and things like that look exactly like the English character, but they're actually a different character. So you can't even tell from like hovering over the link whether you're actually clicking on a good link.
Even into like your bank's link, or if it's a fake link. It's really hard to tell. Yeah.
It's very hard to tell.
Or they get clever with how they name it, where it's like, instead of, I don't want to name a bank on here because I don't want to get them in trouble, but it's like, instead of bank.com, it's, mybank.com or whatever. And if you're just moving quickly trying to pay a bill, you're going to click in it and make a mistake.
But so the social engineering has taken another really interesting but disturbing path as well now. So one, you're getting a lot of these things through text as well. But the other thing that's really interesting is they're doing it by voice. So we've got all these, the ability to replicate somebody's voice. And if you think about, a CEO, you can go and find recordings that they do all over the internet. Just spend 5 minutes on YouTube and you got all the data you need to reproduce their voice and just speak as the CEO, right?
Or reproduce how they talk, right? Because now if you've got transcripts on transcripts, you can figure out like their weird tics, the things that they tend to say, how they reference themselves, how they 100%. Reference their team. And all that could be dropped into a GPT. And now you've got like a clone of the CEO, whether that's for email or for voice. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's one of the services that are now available on the hacking for a service. I should start a business
doing that.
In some jurisdictions, some places are outside of the U.S. jurisdiction, and that's like a major source of income for certain areas. So they completely turn a blind eye to that. So if you want to I've got this guy keeps hacking me all the time, sending me fake emails and doing this. It's like, stop him. It's like, he generates $100 million a year. So, yeah. IT Visionaries is powered today by Meter because every great business relies on great networks. If you're a network engineer, you know how critical uptime, control, and visibility are. Too often, you're stuck troubleshooting issues across fragmented systems or locked into legacy solutions that don't scale. Meter reimagines networking from the ground up. Their full-stack solution from ISP procurement to security, routing, wireless, and beyond gives you deep control and the performance you need. No more piecing together providers or worrying about bottlenecks. Just seamless, scalable connectivity built for today and tomorrow. Big thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Visit meter.com/ITV to book your demo now. That's meter.com/ITV.
I'm hoping on the bright side of this, the same tools that can do the negative can also do the counter, right? So are you seeing anything interesting from that front that's helping protect against these things?
Absolutely. I think that, if you look at security tools, a lot of it's, the differentiation in a lot of these tools is my AI is better than your AI right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and it's necessary too, because when we talk about the volume and frequency of these attacks and the sophistication of these attacks, it really is overwhelming for an individual to try to parse all that information. And so humans aren't really fast enough to react to the kinds of threats that are happening now. So that's why I think we kind of necessarily have to insert AI into that stream. I do think, though, that it's sort of a Sisyphean battle, right? You're defending against, so many players and so many angles of attack and so many threat vectors. It gets to be a lot. And that's why I just keep coming back to this theme of, you have to have that recoverability, because that's ultimately the thing that's going to get you out of the jam. That's what's going to get your business back up and running. And
there's just kind of no way to avoid this, right? Because even we were talking about humans going through and trying to deflect issues, right? And identify, is this problem, is that a problem, is it not?
Yeah.
And we have human error. We can't get it 100% of the time. It just takes once for someone to come through, and now we're in a bad position. AI might be way more accurate, but it's still never going to be 100% accurate. So there's still going to be something that comes through. So what can you do to be prepared for that moment?
Yeah.
And I like to think about it too from and maybe we can go here a little bit. I like to think about it from a customer perspective too. I've given you my data, my information, and now there's people coming in that, per our conversation, it's unavoidable that someone's going to come in at some point and get past your systems and get in. So then as a customer, I want to choose businesses that are doing everything they can to avoid that, but also can respond super quickly when there is a mess up and will be honest and open about what's happening as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen any good examples of that where companies have responded correctly to, a data leak or some sort of security issue. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of that side of this as well.
Yeah. What I would say is that I think companies at large do a better job of reporting on these things than they historically have, but that's not to say they've done a great job.
Yeah, for sure.
In the past, they did just I don't want to talk about this, under the carpet.
Well, I also don't think customers were as alarmed by it. I don't know, people would get concerned, but I think more recently people are more aware that this is actually a huge problem.
Yeah, I think people are feeling the pain, and that's why now they're asking for more accountability in this, right? It is tricky because depending on what happened in the environment, identifying what happened so that you can actually even report on it is complicated. And, you don't want to misstate things or have to like go back and, restate things multiple times. And that's one of the things too, that can cause for these big delays in getting things recovered, because say you had your production systems, they get attacked. Okay, well, now you have to figure out, like, what did they steal? Like, who was impacted? How deep did they go? What was compromised? What was the attack that caused the compromise? And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. I mean, you have to go back and dig in that. And so what happens is, for a lot of organizations, those production environments become a crime scene. And they don't have access to even restore those environments to production, right? Because you may have the insurance company coming in and taking your stuff and saying, like, I need to know what we need to pay out on, because this could have all been your fault and we're not going to pay on this. You have the FBI, CIA, maybe NSA, like you have, police department, whatever, like, we need to preserve this for evidence, right? So then, like, you don't even have access to your environment. Your forensics team is going to have to go, like, I've got to figure out, what happened, what got leaked, what's this, yep. I can't release this stuff back to you. I need this preserved in I need to maintain chain of custody around all this stuff, right? So it does get very complicated with all the, people and actors, and then to take that and report on what happened gets to be really hard to do. But yeah. I think the thing that's nice is that now we're seeing governments step up and say, we need you to do these things at a minimum,
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, Chris, this has been awesome. I thank you for letting me come on and sort of pepper with you with a few questions. And I love being able to hear more about these three threats. And I think it's probably worthwhile doing a checkup like this maybe every couple months, because everything is changing so quickly when it comes to cybersecurity. That's always been the case, but I feel like it's accelerating. So staying on top of it is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like when I go out and I talk to folks in the industry, like cybersecurity is the big one, but the other big one that we haven't touched on yet, that we should do another one of these is AI. Because everybody wants to figure out AI right now. And that is not a straightforward path.
Yeah, well, I would love to do that with you at some point as well.
All right, next time.
Thanks
for watching. I had a great time with Lacey. Fun conversation. Please think about liking, subscribing, share this with a friend, and I'll see you next time.